first part of the sermon this morning is a dramatic presentation, so grab your popcorn. It's based upon the scripture reading we just heard. You know, I was there that day that you just heard about. I was actually there. At the time, I was 10 years old, and I lived in that village that you heard about. And I lived with my mom and dad and had brothers and sisters, but we had a little 4-year-old, my sister, who was born with an illness. The people around town, they said that my sister was punished by God because of things that my family and grandparents and all had did in the past. That it was God punishing her. But I didn't believe it. No. How could a God do something to an innocent child like that? Then our family heard about the person they called Jesus. They heard that he was coming close enough to where we could travel and see him. We could travel to that deserted place. We live in the village, but it's that deserted place way out there, close to the sea. But we never go there. It's dangerous there. How would we get there? We have to walk a long ways. Would we make it back home? But we heard about the man named Jesus, and we felt compelled to go see him. We heard that he could actually heal the sick. We felt like we needed to do that for our loved ones. So myself, I knew it was out in the deserted place. So while everybody was hurried to get packed to take what we needed out to go to this deserted place, I took some loaves and 2 fish and I put them in my backpack. And I thought, well, it's going to be a long trip and I'd like to eat. I want to be prepared. So we did. We got ready, and we traveled across the mountains towards the sea, just like the water out there, and we headed there. And as we got closer and closer, we saw crowds of people gathered. There were thousands, like you heard about in the story this morning. But it's very interesting that there were 5,000 men and women and children too. Don't we count? I said to myself, I'm 10 years old. There were really 8,000 or 9,000 people there that day. And we saw the masses and the crowds. And I just wondered, what is this person? What is this Jesus going to be like? What's he going to look like? I'm 10 years old, so I couldn't even imagine what this person would be like. And we got to the crowd, and we pushed our way through. We wanted healing for my little sister. We got towards the front, and you could see him. He was up on the side of a hill. He wasn't what I thought he would be like. I thought he would actually walk around and have a glow around him, and have a halo above his head, and all these types of things a little kid at 10 years old would imagine. But he wasn't like that at all. He was just like you. He was just like me. I was surprised. But he was different. He was different. There was something about him that was different from anyone I had seen before. He had this internal strength about him. He was so different. We watched him. We listened to him. I held my little sister's hand, waiting for our chance to be able to talk with him, to ask him to help us, like he was helping everybody else around. It came our turn. He was so gentle, loving, compassionate. You could feel it. You could feel that you were loved. He didn't care about where we were from or what village or what our faith background was. He didn't judge us. He loved us. He held my little sister in his arms. We could feel the healing resonate through her. We could feel her become a different person, whole. We got to watch that, experience to be a part of that. She was transformed. I didn't really understand how. I just knew it was happening right in front of us. We walked away and he healed many hundreds of other people. It started becoming nighttime and started getting dusk. It was funny. He had these people called disciples around him, these guys. When I read back in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they have different accounts of what really happened that day. Each one has a little different take on the story, but the story is the same. There's Andrew and Philip. Because they said, what are we going to do? How are we going to feed all these thousands of people? How? And one of them says, well, it would take 6 months' wages for us to feed all of these people. It can't happen. We can't do it. And another one said, it's time, let's send them back to the village so that they can go and be fed. So they can find their own food. Jesus watched this, and he just looked at them. He just looked at them, that's all it took. He says, don't send them away. Don't send them away. They just looked back at him. Then all of a sudden, Jesus looked over at me. I'm a 10-year-old boy. And he looks at me and he makes eye contact. And he says, come here. I was scared to death. What does he want with me? What difference can I make? I'm a 10-year-old little boy. But I trusted him. So I went up to him. And he says, son, what's in your backpack? And I opened it up, and there were 2 fish and 5 loaves. And he took them from me, and he showed them to those disciple people around him. And he said, first he was thankful, then he blessed them. Ever since then, I've always done a blessing at a meal. I think it's very important. But he took these elements and he gave them. And he said, feed the people. And they looked back at him in amazement at first. How? How? And he said, trust me. So they took these 2 fish and the 5 loaves, and they started breaking them up and giving them to people. And I stood on the side of that hill with Jesus, and I watched the masses, the thousands of people. The disciples, each of them had a little share, and they would give those things, that food, to people, and then they would take it. But then they would open up the food, the supplies they had brought with them, and they decided to give it some to other people. They were sharing what they had out in that deserted place. They made the decision to share what they had with the people around them. And they just didn't decide, well, I'm going to give you some and not you, you're scary. I'm going to give you some and not you. You live on the wrong side of the town or the village. They shared with each other. And it was like something I've never seen. We weren't used to that. It was a new way, a different way. But people, the thousands of people there, they trusted Jesus. They were sharing. The meal went on forever, it seemed like. It was wonderful. You could feel the love and compassion each person had for the other. It was just amazing for this 10-year-old boy just to sit with Jesus and witness. It ended. The meal was over. The disciples gathered up what was left over and brought that back to Jesus and said, look, there's this abundance of food, this abundance here that now we have from these 2 fish and 5 loaves. Nobody said anything about a miracle happening, unless you want to call that miracle compassion and love for your neighbor. It was such a blessing to witness that, to be a part of that meal, be a part of that day. It's something I'll take with me the rest of my life. I'll remember what it was like to hold Jesus' hand and watch that happen all around us. Thank him for that. Thank him for healing my sister. Thank him for always being there for all of us. Loaves and the fishes story. I love how Matthew tells us, when it was evening, the disciples came to Jesus and said, this is a deserted place. A deserted place. In the hours late, send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves. Now, I read that part of the scripture over and over, and it kept speaking to me, that deserted place. This part of the story is symbolic for what Jesus had just gone through. Today's scripture reading began with, now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. Then I thought, when Jesus had heard what? Did he feel the need to withdraw to this deserted place? So I read the scripture before, and it said that Jesus had heard terrible, horrible, disturbing news. Jesus was distraught at the time. And why? Because John the Baptist, his cousin, the one that was known as the prophet, his friend, the one with whom he had such a spiritual relationship, the one whom Jesus asked to baptize me in the waters, had been tragically killed by King Herod, beheaded in fact. And what a tragic loss that was. Jesus was distraught. The prophet who had been religiously preparing the way for Jesus himself, for the new way, was murdered. Jesus must have felt devastated that the world could do that to such a person. And it made me think about reading this, about how did this affect Jesus' mission and Jesus' sense of hope. He needed to be alone. He needed to find a deserted place. And I prayed about it, and I felt like the deserted place in today's scripture reading is symbolic of the place that we also go when it appears to be there's no understanding, no reason to what sometimes happens around us. Have you ever felt like that? Like if somebody had died, a family member, or tragically killed, or this or that happened, and you just felt like, why? That makes no sense to me. I can't understand why this would happen. Have you ever felt, I know I have, a feeling of being in that deserted space, that place? And we know what that means. We've talked about a couple of weeks ago on a global level, on a local community level, and on a direct personal level, don't we? 3 weeks ago we talked about, the fighting in Gaza, the downing of the Malaysian flight where 200 people were killed, 200 Nigerian girls who were missing, all these things going on. This deserted place. Then we talked about in Boston, our country here, where 2 transgender people were killed or murdered during the summer, only for the reason of who they were. And then on a closer level, a good friend of mine and her partner, a couple months ago, the partner's mother passed away, and with 2 or 3 weeks later, her mother passed away, and now his brother's sick, very ill, and all that. And I started thinking about her and how she must feel. I've been praying for her because I thought how she must feel right now. Because it just seems like one thing after another, and it just seems like it isn't stopping. And I thought, does she feel like she's in a deserted place right now? It can feel like a deserted place, just like Jesus felt when John the Baptist was killed. But I love Jesus' response in the next part of today's lesson. Jesus said to them, they need not go away, which we heard in the presentation. They need not go away. We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, bring them here to me. In the feeling of being overwhelmed, the feeling like we're overwhelmed like never before, a lot of times we feel like, well, we have nothing left, or a little left, don't we? Like, what else is there to hang on to? And that's what the disciples were saying that day was, look, we only have 2 fish and 5 loaves. We have almost nothing, and there's thousands and thousands of people here to feed. What are we going to do? We have nothing, very little. There's not enough. They have that feeling of desperation, of feeling overwhelmed. I know I've felt like that before, many times, asking God, what else do you want from me? I've given and given, and I don't feel that security around me that I need to feel, that I deserve, that I need. And I'm asking God, why? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? Sometimes this can be a feeling of a church or community of faith. God, why have you brought us here? And I started thinking about the Israelites when they were traveling through that desert they were traveling through, and they were praying and they had no food. And then what happened? And that's symbolic also, that manna started falling down from the heavens like rain, didn't it? Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish. He looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. Jesus knew how to turn a situation around, didn't he? He did. He knew how to turn it around. And he's attempting to show us as an example of how we can turn situations around. My friend who I talk about the scripture reading online every week now, well, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, which just enlightens me so, and it's just such a joy in my life, this week asked, what's the scripture reading this week? I couldn't wait to hear what she had to say. It was wonderful. Jesus shared a meal with the crowd. He was spiritually intimate with them. He didn't send them to Captain D's back in the village to get the $4.99 lunch special, did he? He broke bread with them. He opened himself up to them to listen to them, and they in turn listened to him. Jesus felt compassion for them, is what happened. That's how he turned the situation around. It was not as much about the food, it was about the compassion that he showed for those around him in need. My friend writes this: to really feel compassion, it must come from a more connected, honest place. I need to sit with the pain just like I need to sit with my own suffering to have compassion for myself. To dull or numb the pain, I will act from a dull place. When I allow myself to inhabit the moment, to feel the pain, compassion is birthed because I am making a place for it by caring tenderly for my own suffering. Jesus was suffering with the loss in his life of his loved one. She then says to come back to yourself through listening, prayer, meditation, whatever the practice or the portal for wholeness. From this place, I have something real to offer. Insight, wisdom, and a natural compassion are then abundantly available. If I tend to my own need and connect with that and aware of how that's affecting me, then I'm abundantly available for other people. Compassion isn't just a resonance with suffering. There's a movement to act. Sitting with my feelings, they have an opportunity to unfold. Sitting with the outrage and the anger, just allowing it to be there, it unfolds and I see the fear underneath. Allowing the fear its place, it opens up a grieving which then unfolds into an authentic caring for the world. It's helped me by reading that to deal more with the things that's happening around us. How can we live in a world that does such horrible things to one another? Killing innocent children. Caught in our storm. She writes, our own honest interaction with our personal sorrows can open us up to the sorrows of others. I'm hoping someday she'll preach here. Because of this insight into his own relationship with the divine, because Jesus was also 100% human, and he showed it here. Jesus was able to connect with others. He was able to facilitate healing because of what he felt in his own loss. This is the place where we can truly be open to serving and helping other people. And that's where we find abundance. And like we said last week, that can be found in the ordinary, in a simple meal, which we'll share together in just a few minutes. And it doesn't require us to label it as a miracle. Because these days we're used to the Disney experience where everything has to be over the top, doesn't it? To be classified as fun or real. But it can be found in the ordinary, in the everyday. It's our thinking which needs to be tweaked. It can be found in the everyday, in the connection with one another and those around us. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over, the broken pieces, and 12 baskets were filled. A basket for each disciple. A basket, a way to live for each one of us. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The answer to our faith journey and our call is to live with compassion. Because when we live this way that Jesus is demonstrating for us, then we do live in a life of abundance. King Herod's meal, where he gave permission to have John the Baptist beheaded and killed, was a meal too, wasn't it? It was at a party and a meal where he gave permission to have John the Baptist, or instructions to be beheaded. His meal was centered around fear. Jesus' meal, where he fed thousands of people and continues to do so today, is centered around love and compassion. When we find the peace which isn't of this world, but exists in this world within ourselves, we can then open ourselves up to loving others in a brand new way. When we find and connect with that peace that's within us, we then have the ability to unlimited love and compassion to others. Instead of attempting to turn the undocumented people and undocumented children away at the Mexican border, because that's what came upon my spirit as I was writing this sermon. I thought about that. You know, we have children trying to, get over the fence from Mexico into the United States. And I thought about them. I thought about how they feel when they're crossing that deserted place in the desert, all alone and frightened. About those people who are alone and frightened in that deserted place, in that space. From this lesson, Jesus shares with us we need to treat them with love and compassion. Maybe we should follow Jesus' example when he said, they need not go away. Feed them, love them, show them compassion. And then we may be living the same miracle or the same experience of 2,000 years ago. And that same miracle, that same experience that happened, continues to happen today. Amen.
Amen.